Welcome. I'm Chris Mahart, Associate Editor of Manufacturing Engineering Magazine, and this is another SME Media webinar. Our topic is Cloud 101, how the cloud provides greater ROI in manufacturing. This presentation is sponsored by Vertex Software. Vertex is a provider of manufacturing visualization and experts in cloud computing, transforming how people and companies share and collaborate with 3D product data across the extended enterprise. Their solutions improve the speed and quality of collaboration so teams can make better decisions and get to market faster. Our presenters are Kip Peters, Director of Risk Management, and Matt Hine, Director of Product at Vertex Software. Kip has over 25 years of experience in on-premise and cloud-based information assurance, data security, and risk management. Matt has over 15 years of experience in designing and building B2B cloud-based collaborative applications in manufacturing, finance, and defense. During this webinar, Kip and Matt will discuss the opportunities enabled by cloud-based solutions for mission-critical data and how important it is to realize the full potential of Industry 4.0, highlighting how manufacturers who modernize their processes to a digital cloud-based approach experience greater security, easier implementation, and higher ROI, offering an introduction to the differences between cloud-based and traditional on-premise solutions, direction on keeping your critical data safe, and top tips for implementing the cloud in your organization. Before I turn things over, I'd like to highlight a couple of housekeeping items and outline how the webinar will proceed. On the right side of your screen, you'll find a question and answer box. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to ask a question, please type it in this box and send it along. These questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Should we run out of time, the questions will be sent to Kip and Matt, and you'll receive an answer by email. Should you experience any difficulty during the webinar, such as a blank screen or a lack of sound, please use the Q&A box to alert us, and we will respond individually in writing with a suggested fix. That brings us to the final housekeeping item. Should you experience a difficulty affecting your viewing, the presentation will be available in recorded form at around 4 p.m. Eastern today. You may then watch the recorded version of this webinar at a time and place when you have more bandwidth. You may also watch the webinar as many times as you wish to catch details you might have missed or for any other reason. All you have to do is sign in again using the credentials you used to join us now. You may even share those credentials with colleagues who might benefit from learning more about this topic. Now, let me turn the microphone over to Kip and Matt, who will introduce you to Cloud 101, how the cloud provides greater ROI in manufacturing.
Thank you, Chris. This is Kip, and Matt is here as well. And we'll fast forward here a little bit. But thank you for that introduction. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Matt and I are excited to spend the next hour or so with you to talk about cloud technologies and Vertex software. As a bit of an agenda, we will talk about provide a cloud introduction. We'll talk about return on investment, talk a bit about security and adoption, and then Matt's going to provide a demo for you of Vertex software. Before we get started, we'd like to get a feel where everybody is with the cloud right now. You should see a poll on your screen. If you could take just a moment here and, to the best of your ability, indicate where you feel like you are from a cloud computing perspective at your organization, that would be helpful to us, and we'll try to keep that in mind. So we'll just give it a few moments. Give you a few more seconds here. If you haven't responded and would like to, I know that you've signed in, but we're not going to see who indicated what, so no attribution whatsoever. 5 seconds. All right. Thank thank you for that. So let's see where we're at. So 14% of the audience today consider themselves fully cloud implemented or are intentionally heading that way, and that's fantastic. We've got 28% we have started implementing, but we're worried it isn't secure. That is not unusual, I will say. And 36% we haven't started, and then 20% indicate that you're not sure. So good information. We'll try to address some of these things and keep this in mind as we move forward. To begin with, let's start. Just take a few moments to highlight some of the basics of cloud computing. See a definition there on your screen from Amazon Web Services. This isn't a public service announcement for Amazon, but AWS is generally accepted to be the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform in the market. They do a lot of things, and I tell you that simply to support our use of their definition in today's webinar. As you look at that, some things to keep in mind about what cloud is. It's computing delivered when you need it. Cloud services can actually replace just about everything you do today in your own data center. They're delivered via the internet, right? So connectivity is crucial. And because required computing, storage, and other capabilities are delivered only when you need them, pricing is more like renting by the microsecond than it is buying. Here's a high-level view of the three major types of cloud services, with infrastructure as a service on the left, followed by platform as a service and software as a service. Software as a service, or SaaS, seems to be the primary or initial path that a lot of organizations seem to take initially, when they start cloud computing. SaaS is also a type of cloud computing we use most often in our personal lives. So many of the apps that we use, other services that we use, free or otherwise, they're actually SaaS solutions. You don't have them installed and running in your own personal data center. You connect via a web browser or some sort of device like that, and you potentially may have something installed on your computer, phone, iPad, and you actually leverage the computing power and storage operated and managed someplace else. So Gmail, your favorite weather app, Facebook, everybody has Facebook, right? Twitter, those sorts of things, you access via the web or an app on your device. And it combines, in some cases, some local compute and storage with most compute and storage, in the cloud. We've included this picture here basically to show you that as you move from infrastructure as a service, or I'm going to use the term IaaS, if that's okay, to SaaS, the balance of what you manage versus the cloud provider manages shifts. So at the organization, there are things that you need to do in reference to the flavor of cloud that you're utilizing. With IaaS, you're typically provided with physical type services, so things like data center, storage, memory, processing power, the ability to connect to that cloud provider, an underlying level of security and capability, and then you as a customer install and configure your own servers, your own operating systems, virtual machines, databases, applications, security, monitoring. You install, configure, manage those things. It's essentially a data center with some built-in tools and capabilities for your use. AWS, mentioned before, and Microsoft Azure or Azure are two prime examples. With PaaS, you get more capabilities that are provided and managed for you by the cloud provider. Things like operating systems, virtual machines, databases, and often special applications are typically added to the mix. Some of these examples would include AWS, Elastic Beanstalk, Windows Azure again, Salesforce, OpenShift. With PaaS, the provider builds, manages, and offers stronger, more capable building blocks that take care of more back-end concerns than IaaS does. And SaaS solutions, of course, provide the most services and the least amount of available customization. Might be beneficial to throw another example out there. You may see here and there examples of providers that cross cloud service boundaries. Salesforce provides some tools that are strictly SaaS-based and therefore much more out of the box, but they also provide a PaaS platform that allows organizations to quickly create customized solutions to solve that organization's specific business problem. They do this by leveraging the building blocks Salesforce has created to speed software creation using their platform. So sometimes they kind of exist in a couple different places. Turning to ROI, to many organizations, this is just about the only reason to use cloud. In fact, An IBM study indicates that 80% of business executives believe return on investment is a key influence when choosing to adopt a cloud strategy. And basically, by identifying ROI as a priority, they're indicating they want to do more with less, right? I want to invest less, typically less, as an IT guy and security guy that comes through loud and clear all the time, and get more in return, right? For today's purposes, I'd like to talk about three primary variables to consider when comparing cloud versus on-prem and how it impacts ROI. The first is the update cycle. Traditional software providers tend to release one update annually, or at least not very often, and your software licenses then are essentially somewhat limited in their ability to provide new features. More or less, you get what you initially paid for and not a lot more. Have you ever faced compatibility problems because someone else has a higher version of the same software you're using? Have you waited weeks and months for IT to install the new versions of even simple things like Windows and the Office suite? With traditional software, IT organizations have to balance new features and capabilities with the effort it takes to update the software. And that effort can be significant. Even in mature organizations, you often have internal conflicts because everyone just hasn't received the latest update yet. Does any of that resonate with you? With cloud solutions, updates are provided automatically in real time, and in many cases, almost continuously. So the customer in general has latest and greatest software for larger percentages of the time, and as it's normally centralized processing, everyone using it has the same version all the time. That would include SaaS, where business functionality or capabilities provided directly to you, the end user, or other elements of IaaS or PaaS, where greater functions and capabilities might be realized more by developers or other solution providers, and they then, of course, are leveraged to provide services to end users. Second variable is scalability. You can think of scalability like the accelerator in your car. If you want additional capability from your car, in this case, defined by the speed to your destination, the ability to join an interstate, or maybe the ability to get out of trouble, or maybe get in trouble, all you have to do is step on the gas and the car responds, right? It's more or less instantaneous, and you see the results immediately. When additional capability is needed with your computing resources, think computing power, think storage, things like that, on-prem solutions require the IT team and organization to invest in more hardware, infrastructure, likely maintenance fees, support staff, licensing. Think of major quarter-end or year-end processes or high versus low times. Do certain actions require significantly more computing power, even if it's needed here and there throughout the day or the week? Has your desktop bogged down recently, or have you sat there and gone to grab a cup of coffee waiting for some system to perform some function? And for you engineers, maybe to load a large model. Think of an engineer working on a 200-item CAD drawing versus one working on a 2 million-item CAD drawing. With on-prem solutions, each one of those engineers would have the same computing power, even if at this moment they don't need the same computing power. An IT department that has to build and deliver those on-prem solutions has to build to those high times, and that level of investment is experienced whether you use it or not, and that can create significant costs. If we continue with the car example, it's like paying for gas and maintenance when all you do is keep the accelerator on the floor. If you have a real-time gas mileage display in your car, think about what it looks like when you get on it versus when you're cruising on the local highway. So the cloud can scale automatically in real time to provide the performance needed by users when they need it. This can be done because you're loading a 2 million item CAD drawing, or because for some reason there are 10 times as many users in the system right now than there were yesterday. This can especially become important in manufacturing with user groups outside of engineering that want access to high-end software solutions that require intensive graphics or GPUs. Matt will show some of this later in the demo when he shows how Vertex has leveraged the cloud to provide near instantaneous access to even very large CAD drawings. For the third and final variable regarding ROI for today's conversation, let's speak specifically to the manufacturing world. In manufacturing, traditional solutions are encumbered by the physical limitations of the hardware on someone's desk and the procedures involved in working with files and models. Sharing is accomplished via email or FTP or some other file sharing process, which generally means you lose control of the data. Think about what happens when you send an engineering file to someone else. Do you maintain that control? Can you see who has access? Can you see who has accessed it? And can you remove that access whenever you want? Because of the power of the cloud and by leveraging centralized sharing and collaboration models, cloud-based software will let you log in from anywhere with any device and collaborate with the same data. Feedback loops can be easily created and managed, adding transparency and accountability. Imagine collaborating with a model where you allow others access to the entire or subsets of the model, but you retain control of the data and can remove that access at any time. Matt will show you later how effective, easily and effective it is with Vertex to share, collaborate, and control engineering data. Security. It's like everywhere. You see references to security constantly, and even to somebody like me, it's becoming somewhat tiring. But thanks to hackers and other bad guys out there, one of the primary concerns that organizations identify today, just like our audience, is security as an issue with cloud computing. And that's no different with manufacturers. As we're talking to manufacturers about Vertex, one of the main things that keeps coming up is security. It's the safety, it's the security of their intellectual property, and it makes complete sense. Thinking more broadly, the 2019 Fails Data Threat Report says that over half of U.S. companies have experienced a security breach of any kind, and a third have experienced one in the last year. So security events happen. Unfortunately, that's fact. It's just one of the things that we've had to acknowledge over the years is we just can't stop everything. I'm sure most of you have received a letter in the mail informing you that your data has been exposed somehow. I know that I have. Let's contrast this general security incident exposures or experience with the possibilities of cloud computing. Gartner, and there is the Cloud Secure document, indicates that there will be 60% fewer security incidents on IaaS servers versus servers in a typical data center through 2022. And another interesting stat, Gartner also says that when implementing cloud visibility and control tools, 1/3 fewer security failures will be experienced as compared against those that do not implement such tools. So if you're using a cloud computing platform and using it appropriately, you can generally expect better results than if you do not. Remember this slide from earlier? Just like the rest of the technology-related elements of cloud solutions that are managed either by the provider or the customer, security is the same way. There are certain responsibilities on the cloud provider, and there are other responsibilities on the customer, and those things change somewhat depending on the type of cloud services being used. Depending on the type of cloud you're using, there are some key things the cloud provider either simply takes care of or makes easier for the customer to implement. I'm going to focus on two: encryption and data redundancy. In most SaaS solutions, encryption of data is pretty much a given. Whether it's Salesforce, Office 365, or some other SaaS service, your data is simply encrypted. In other types of cloud, the tools provided by the cloud provider make it a lot easier for an organization to implement and manage data encryption as they see fit. If I compare that against how most organizations leverage encryption today in their environment, it's major difference. That same Fails Data Threat Report that I referenced earlier indicates that less than 30% of organizations are encrypting the most common and most important use cases. So things like endpoints, databases, file storage. Why? Simply because encryption in the typical data center on-prem environment is difficult to implement. It's difficult to manage, and it's very expensive from both monetary and computing perspectives. If you wanted to encrypt all the data in your internal databases and in your server-based file structures, it's a massive undertaking. With cloud, it's just about as simple as flipping a switch. There are simply no barriers and therefore no excuses to not to provide that level of protection. The other big security benefit of cloud is relatively automatic data recovery or even resiliency. Instead of having to implement complex backup and recovery solutions or some sort of mirroring capability, depending on the type of cloud solutions, it's either just there or you have the ability to easily turn it on and off. Some of you may be familiar with SaaS solutions like Microsoft OneDrive that provides data redundancy and even versioning. There's a vast quantity of other security-related items we could get into for the next hour or two. Suffice it to say, many of those fall into a stronger partnership between the customer and provider where the two work hand in hand. So let's get down and dirty. Should you be concerned about the security of the cloud? When I speak to people who have what I consider an unhealthy perspective on cloud security, one of the things that I point out is that for reputable, well-known, and widely used cloud providers, security is very much a priority. They have to be secure or they simply won't remain in business. They're literally under trial by fire. Microsoft probably defeats more directed attacks in a month than a typical organization will see in several years. They're a major target, and that in and of itself concerns some people, but the evidence actually shows they're doing a pretty good job. They know what they're doing, and they've got a lot of resources to devote to security. Most organizations don't have those sorts of resources. If you're the CISO, or if you go talk to your CISO, I bet he or she wishes they had more money, more support, and more capabilities. Your general organization simply can't commit the same resources that these sorts of cloud providers can to security. So can you depend on cloud security? Yes. Can you just buy a cloud service and think all your security is handled? No. It's a partnership, and it needs to be thought of as a partnership. When it comes to actual incidents, if you look at most cloud-related security incidents that have been published, the problem hasn't been with the cloud provider. It's been with the customer and how they've used the cloud. According to Gartner, at least 95% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault through 2022. As I just mentioned, it's not is the cloud secure as much as it is are you using the cloud securely. When I think about how to gain support in an organization for cloud-based computing, I tend to think of three main audiences: those who own and manage the various business processes, those who implement, secure, and evaluate solutions and technology practices, and those who provide some sort of governance over the whole thing: boards of directors, executive committees, steering committees, those sorts of groups. It's important to get beyond the hype, and both positive and negative. Get beyond the hype and understand the facts. Move beyond airplane magazines and targeted ads. Do the research and ensure a broad and consistent understanding of the elements and consideration of cloud. As a CISO, I've always felt that a big part of my job is education, and this is no different. As you consider the use of cloud as an organization, I have a couple initial recommendations for you to consider to avoid some pain. Talk to IT and security to make sure they're adapting their third-party risk management processes to account for the use of cloud. Existing approaches and questions don't automatically transition to the cloud environment, which is why groups like the Cloud Security Alliance have created questionnaires that organizations can leverage to vet a cloud service provider's risk. Another thing you can do is talk to a few reputable cloud service providers. They have the experience to help make a transition to new and valuable cloud capabilities. This is my final segment. Basically, how do you get started? For those of you who haven't started just yet or aren't very far along, what are the things that you're going to do? Let's just take a few moments to talk about a couple things. First and foremost, cloud governance. And, it's important to have governance in place to leverage cloud appropriately. Governance should not be viewed as controlling or limiting the use of the cloud. I actually look at it the other way. Governance, when done correctly, can be a game changer for the organization. It's much more about making good risk-based decisions. They allow the organization to take advantage of new technology and approaches versus limiting the use of these things. In other words, good governance will allow the organization to make what some might consider higher-risk decisions that are still appropriate and beneficial to the organization. As we've spoken with manufacturers, we've actually seen instances of cloud mandates, directives that require the use of cloud technologies. And I personally believe we're going to see more of this sort of mandate in the future. Next, ensure the risk assessments performed are appropriate to both cloud and the organization's cloud intentions. I mentioned this earlier. You can ask for audit and compliance documentation. You can leverage the Cloud Security Alliance questionnaire. They have the questionnaire called the Consensus Assessments Initiative Questionnaire, and it's a very well-known, very much used, and very well-accepted questionnaire that can be leveraged. As you begin to make some sort of transition, you're going to want to understand how cloud capabilities and processes may impact your legacy internal processes. Think about things like update cycles. How does a regular update cycle impact testing, support, training? You have to think about not just the business process or function itself, but also the impacts to supporting processes and activities. Think of it this way: nothing stands alone. You may move something to cloud that interacts with other legacy processes that remain in the on-prem world. Does that create an issue? Could there be timing problems? You have to think about dependencies and impacts. And finally, there's nothing wrong, and there's actually a lot right about starting with a pilot. Find the right internal and external business partners and try something. Investigate things like how IT supports, manages, and works with the cloud provider. Are your users using the tool as expected? Does the tool work as expected? What benefits did you expect to see, and did you see them? Be intentional about the pilot. Know what you're testing, if you want to think of it that way, and make sure you exercise the tool to have a solid test and see how it comes out. So that concludes my part of the program. As companies undergo digital transformation, the cloud is only going to become more prominent. Knowing how to best utilize the cloud to receive the benefits in a secure way is going to become an organizational differentiator. Given the direction of computing and solution delivery and understanding that doing so in the right way is paramount, those are some of the strong drivers in my personal decision to start working with Vertex software. We are approaching our cloud platform in the right way with security and usability as key drivers. We're providing the current innovative way to collaborate on what historically requires extreme sensitivity to data privacy and protection, but still requires a huge amount of collaboration between engineers and additional internal teams and the supply chain. And with that, we'll move to the demo.
Well, thank you, Kip. As Kip mentioned, there's a lot of challenges that manufacturing companies have with sharing data in a secure way. One of the things that we're doing here at Vertex is transforming the way that engineering teams work outside of their team with either teams like procurement and marketing and sales and service, or with external suppliers. And when you're dealing with external supplier collaboration, it's very important that you can share data and have confidence that your IP is going to be protected. And so one of the things that we're doing here at Vertex is looking at how we can sort of replace the existing ways of sharing 3D data by FTP with third parties, and instead of essentially taking the file and transferring it, as soon as you give the file to someone outside of FTP, now your data's gone. With Vertex, one of the things that we're doing is you don't really need to share files anymore. What you do is upload your data to Vertex, and it's securely in the cloud. And as Kip just discussed, all the ways that we can add transparency to how your data is being stored, it's shared in the cloud. Now we can simply just give another user access as simple as you would be giving someone access to a Google Doc. And what's great about that model is when I share that Google Doc with someone, I can revoke access later. And so I know what data is being stored outside of my system, and I have ways of removing rights and permissions to that data after I've shared it. So one of the things that we're going to do here, I'm just going to give you a quick demo to our platform. So as you can see, that this is a web browser. I'm running in Google Chrome right now. What you're seeing is the login page to Vertex. I'm going to click sign in. So here's our system. And as you'll see, once I log in, this is going to look very familiar to those of you that are familiar with Google Drive or Dropbox or Box. It was our intent from a user experience standpoint to kind of replicate the existing file system user experiences, so it's very familiar to our users. But as you can see on this page, I've got models and stories, which a story is our method for taking different snapshots and compiling those into a story, and I'll show that here in a bit. But that's really the vehicle that you use to share data outside of Vertex. I can also click on Shared with Me to see all the models and stories that have been shared with me. As you can see, we have an import button here. With import, we can load a variety of data types. Right now, for the most part, we support all the neutral CAD file formats. We're also starting to support native file formats as well. Along with simply just clicking the import button and loading new data in, We also have a file upload API that can be tied to your file system to upload data on a, let's say, some sort of cycle, daily, weekly, whatever your design cycle is. So what I'm going to do here is simply just open up a model here. As you can see, that model loaded pretty much instantly. And what you're seeing, I'm going to back out of here. What you're seeing is the internals of this wind turbine. So we've imported an entire wind turbine, and that opened in a matter of seconds. And as you can see, I have pretty good performance here. What is unique about Vertex is that we're doing all of the rendering on the cloud. So we're not relying on anything with the GPU on this laptop or WebGL. We are simply rendering the data in the cloud, distributing that data across our cloud servers, and then compositing an image back to the end user. And so anytime I move my mouse, I'm requesting a new image. And if you were to look at the source code for this, it's simply just returning a PNG back to the server. So with that, it's really secure, because with WebGL and other rendering techniques, you're still sending triangles back to the client to be rendered. And with our system, it's just pixels. So that's one of the ways in which our rendering method is very secure compared to other vendors out there. So I'm gonna go over to the BOM. And as you can see, I've got the full BOM. We're also loading the BOM virtually, and you can kind of see as I scroll, we're just loading BOM items in. And so using these techniques, we're really able to achieve massive model visualization that most vendors are not even going to come close to, especially with the way that we're doing our cloud architecture. It's just born in the cloud, cloud native, so to speak. And this gives us a lot of scalability in terms of model size, as well as the number of users. So what we're going to do here is walk you through the process of, let's pretend that I'm going to be collaborating with a supplier for this wind turbine model. The scenario, we're going to try to increase our rotor diameter here, and doing so, that's going to cause some additional needs that we have on our braking system. So what I'm going to do is just kind of zoom in, and I'm going to go into the nacelle canopy here. As you can see, really interactive frame rates. And I can zoom in and really get down to just that brake. So now that I'm on this brake, I'm going to move this around and find a series of views that I would like to collaborate with that supplier on. So let's pretend that I'm collaborating with Kip here. I could say, Kip, please look at this brake. We're interested in beating this up for a 110 meter rotor diameter. All right. So when I go in and drop that comment, now that goes into my list of other comments that I have here. And so there's also a snapshot that was created over here. So our snapshots are just a way of saving camera position and essentially BOM visibility. And so you can kind of use that to build up different scenarios of how you'd want to collaborate with a supplier. I'm going to zoom in on this snapshot that I have here. So this snapshot, I've removed everything except for just the parts around the break. And the reason why I would want to do this is I'm going to be able to share my geometry out with Kip as reference geometry so that Kip can download that data in a secure way, and then he can use that and test out different breaks that he has with this geometry. So let's pretend that we're going to do that right now. So I'm going to select a variety of snapshots here that I think Kip might be interested in. And here's the original one that I created with him. So I'm gonna select these snapshots, and I'm gonna click New Story. And when I click New Story, that's gonna drop me into a brand new blank story here. So I'm gonna title the story Break Review with Kip. And I can also go in and add a description here. I can also go in and add attachments. So that might be 2D drawings, anything that I would need to give to Kip for working with this data. So again, like it could be 2D drawings, it could be additional 3D data if we need. But the cool thing is I don't necessarily need to add any 3D models as attachments here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here on this snapshot, and I'm going to click Enable Export. And as you can see, there's a little icon that popped up there. This indicates that Kip is going to be able to export out the geometry for the snapshot. So while I'm including all of this additional context for Kip in these other snapshots, Kip will only have access to this export geometry snapshot. So for download outside of the system. I'm going to rearrange some of the snapshots here. Just say additional view. So before I share this story out with Kip, I'm going to click Review Story. And as you can see, all the comments that I've made in these snapshots are coming over. So I want to make sure I go through and review all these comments here. And this will be the area that Kip can reply to some of my comments. And when Kip replies to one of my comments, I'll receive an email notification on my phone, and that will be my signal to know that Kip's working in this model, and we can go back and forth and have that discussion in there, rather than typically those long email chains that you see working with suppliers. So as I click through here, again, click, I can get different vantage points and rotate around separate from the model view that was given to me. Here's the one that I made 5 minutes ago. Again, I can go in and just see different visibility states within here. I can even add additional context. Please see next snapshot for export. So I can go in and add comments after the fact if I want. And here's the snapshot that Kip is actually going to be able to export. And you can see, I can go up here and click the export button, and that will start the process of downloading that data to my computer. And because we're in the cloud, we have a full auditable history of the process of me creating the story, clicking on the enable export button, seeing who I shared that with. When Kip logs in, we have an audit history of how he logged in, which stories he looked at, which data did he export. So really this enables a very secure process that you won't get with your traditional desktop software. So now that I'm looking through this, I think that this is ready to go. I'm going to back out here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull up, I'm sharing my phone screen here. So what we're going to show is how when I share the story out, how easy it is to access this this story on any device. And so I have an iPhone here. Here's my apps. Click back on my Gmail. I'm going to add Kip, and I'm going to add my other identity here, Matt Supplier. And I'm going to click Done. And so when I click Done, basically what happens is we send out emails to the people that you've added in there. If they're a new user, we automatically create a new user on our backend and then send them a temporary password that they can go in and sign in for the first time. I've already signed in with the model before and with this username, and so I can just click Review Story and get into this story. So I'm going to click Review Story here, pull this up, and here I am. So as you can see, I get basically the same view. I can go in and click on one of these models. And again, this is just an iPhone on an internet, Wi-Fi internet connection here. We're simply just streaming images, and so this is not going to heat up my phone or run the GPU down, run my battery down with the GPU. Go through here, and like I said, I can go in, look at the comments, reply to the comment, and have my discussion with Kip there. So along with that, as that supplier, then I could go in, add the attachment to the story, then me as, I'm the OEM here, I would get an email that someone had attached some new geometry, and then go in, look at the comments, decide whether or not that new part is actually going to work for me. I can put that back into my model and then continue that design review process with that supplier. Along with that, I'd just like to reiterate how I think when some people hear about cloud, their chief concern is security. I think one of the things that people don't really think about is by being in the cloud, you have to connect and to our cloud servers, and we can see every single thing that happens with users in your account. And so if you're worried about where's my data going to, who is seeing my data, how often are they seeing it, what's the IP address that they're accessing this from. Now with Vertex and with all cloud software, you really have that immutable history of all those events that have happened within the software. And so that at least gives your IT security people peace of mind that they know what's happening. And that also allows us to add additional controls on how that data is being shared. So think like whitelisting domains and things like that. Like I said, the other advantage here is now that I've shared this story with Kip, if for some reason my IT person says, hey, wait a minute, that Kip Peters, I'm not sure about him. We should remove access. Let's say we're at the end of our contract with that supplier, I can go in and click remove, and I've removed Kip from that story. Okay. All right. And I will send it back over to Kip. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that insightful look at cloud computing's opportunities to manufacturers and how they can utilize it in their operations. We have received several questions from the audience and will be addressing them now. If you're unable to stay around until the end, remember you can revisit this webinar anytime you wish after 4 p.m. Eastern today. Again, should we have to wrap up before all the questions can be addressed, any unanswered questions will be answered by email. There is still time to get your questions submitted. You can enter the questions right up until the webinar concludes. Now, on to our first question. What sort of timeline do you see in transitioning a company from on-premise to a cloud environment for the first time?
This is Kip. I'll take the first cut, and Matt will add something if I go crazy or he's got something to add. But it really depends. I'm sorry to say that. If you're a long-time legacy organization looking to move to cloud, if you will, to move fully to cloud would take forever, take a very long time. I've seen organizations put a goal out there and reference it in things like, as we look at new technologies and capabilities, as we look at upgrading software or major contract renewals, we will look at cloud capabilities and try to go that direction. And so they do it over time. I've actually seen a CIO tell the board of directors that they will be completely cloud-based in 6 months, and horribly failed because it's just not quite that simple. So to move and start using cloud, that can be days or weeks. I mean, you can do that very, very quickly, but to completely move over, that's going to take a longer period of time.
Yeah. The only thing that I would add to that, like if you're starting a new company today, you're most likely going to say, well, I'm going to do everything in the cloud because I get all the cost efficiencies there, right? Versus if you're a manufacturer that's been around for 100 years, you're probably still operating on some mainframes from the 70s still for mission critical things. And so it just takes time. And you see a lot of digital transformation initiatives right now in companies trying to upgrade some of these legacy systems. And one of the first things they're probably doing is evaluating whether or not this system of record should be in the cloud or not.
Great, thanks, guys. My next question is a little more product-based. If I share a story with someone who doesn't have an account, can they create their own stories to share with me?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So the way that our stories work, we want to make sure that you can collaborate with whoever you want. So we're not necessarily limiting who can view a story or need a paid license to view that story. So that's kind of the way our licensing model works. And so if I share a story with Kip, the only thing that he can do in the Vertex software is really open that story and collaborate with me on that one story. Kip's not going to, from the way that our provisioning on access works, Kip's not going to go back into that model and be able to create a new story himself unless he also has a paid license. One recent thing that we did add, and this came up with some of our customers, is, well, if you shared a story with me, yet I'm not the right person to be answering this question, so now we allow you to reshare a story within the same domain. And that's enabled by the story creator themselves. So.
Great. Next, we're asked, when working with a cloud provider on data security, what sorts of things should we be implementing or discussing?
So you're going to want to know what their internal controls are. So you'll want to look for certain documentation around that. So like a SOC 2 Type 2 will list the controls the organization uses, and then a third-party independent assessment of how effective those controls are. So that'll give you visibility into their, not just the software, but into their organization's practices, principles, and things like that. So, you're going to want to know what's going on at that end. You're certainly going to want to understand the things that you're responsible for, so the things that you should be doing, and that could be anywhere from the type of data that you might include, which would go into classification and protection mechanisms, to user-based. In many cloud solutions, you're able to leverage your company's identity and access management system. So you would be essentially be controlling who would have access to the system and the different things that they could do. You want to understand different reports, visibility. Matt had mentioned, having the visibility of what's going on inside, what information was shared, who was looking at it, things like that. Those are things you're going to want to understand too. What are the capabilities? Think of them as security features of the product that I can leverage. So those are, kind of a snapshot of some of the things that you're going to want to be talking about and discussing.
Great. Our next question asker, I work with a variety of customers, some who have secure data that I'm contractually required to house on site, but not all customers have as strict of needs. Is there a way that I can leverage the cloud while protecting the critical data on site?
In those instances, I guess there's a couple different ways to approach it. One, you can try to renegotiate with those customers and discuss the capabilities, what you're trying to do with the cloud, and try to remove that barrier, if you will, to happen to have it on-prem. The other thing that you can simply not go cloud. You can also have separate systems, which would be expensive, and most are not going to want to go that way. But ultimately, you could start to explore where you would retain the data, so that you would leverage both storage on-prem and storage within the cloud. In this type of instance, there would probably be conversations about where the computing takes place, which likely is going to be in the cloud, right? So if it's contractual that storage needs to be on-prem, you'd want to investigate or at least understand what the requirements may be or expectations are for where the actual compute takes place.
Great. The next question is for Matt. Matt, you mentioned distributed servers. Don't understand what that means. How does that add additional security to my data?
Yeah, so one of the techniques that you see with cloud computing is that, I think sometimes people think about, well, cloud computing is just, I have this server on my premises right now, and I'm just simply moving that server to the cloud. That's one way people get into the cloud. The other way, when we talk about distributed computing, what we do is basically fire up a lot of servers in parallel and just send different jobs to all these servers, in our case on Amazon Web Services. And what that allows us to do is do a lot of computation very quickly and then bring that job back to the end user. And because we're kind of chopping up all these different jobs, there's no one server that you would be able to, let's say, hack into and get the model or the full story of what you're sharing. And so by doing that, you've kind of obfuscated like where someone can go and access that data. No one person is going to know all the different servers across the globe in which we're using. So in that regard, we kind of talk about, think of like the paper shredder, right, analogy, and you're running all that data through a paper shredder and just sending it all around the world. And so someone would have to go around and find each location at where that shredded paper is and then assemble it back. It's much harder for someone to gain access rather than just using one single server and just putting all of your data on that one server.
And in our case, you would have to find all those data bits and
decrypt. And of course they're all encrypted. When we talk about walking security architect through the process in which we ourselves would think about how could we break our own system, it starts sounding like a Ocean's 13 type mission impossible situation to go about doing it. So
that puts us at our time, and as this webinar has shown, cloud computing is changing the way manufacturers are doing business. The opportunities enabled by today's connected manufacturing environments, Industry 4.0, and the industrial Internet of Things are not without new challenges for manufacturers, and cloud computing helps businesses realize the full potential of these transformative technologies. SME and SME Media can help you keep abreast of developments within cloud computing and Industry 4.0 and their impact on the manufacturing industry. Check out our podcast at advancedmanufacturingnow.com to listen to a wide variety of manufacturing professionals discuss the challenges, opportunities, and factors impacting manufacturing today. And always keep an eye out for breaking news and coverage of the latest technology and strategies for manufacturing at advancedmanufacturing.org. Thank you for joining us for this SME Media webinar. We hope you found it informative and that you'll join us for future webinars.